There is a book in the Bible that was written for moments exactly like this one, not for the comfortable seasons, not for the easy days when the world feels ordered and people seem trustworthy, and truth is the obvious default. It was written for the harder stretches of human experience, for the times when the ground beneath your feet shifts without warning, when the people around you say one thing and live another, when the information you receive has been filtered through so many layers of self-interest that finding the original truth beneath it feels almost impossible. It was written for the times when you look around at the culture shaping your world and realize that the most powerful voices in the room are not always the most honest ones, and that the systems you once trusted to reward integrity seem increasingly comfortable rewarding performance instead. That book is Proverbs, and it has never been more relevant than it is right now. We live in an age of curated appearances. The distance between the image people project and the reality they actually inhabit has perhaps never been wider in human history. Social media profiles are polished beyond recognition, presenting highlight reels as though they were documentary footage. Public figures speak with magnificent confidence about things they know to be uncertain or false or deeply complicated in ways their declarations do not begin to acknowledge. Workplace cultures reward people who tell leaders what those leaders want to hear, while the ones who speak uncomfortable truths are quietly sidelined. Conversations between friends are laced with half-truths, strategic omissions, and carefully managed impressions designed to protect interests rather than honor relationship. Even well-intentioned people participate in small deceptions constantly. The social lie that maintains a comfortable fiction, the flattering exaggeration that keeps a relationship warm, the selective presentation of facts that makes a personal decision look better than an honest accounting would support. Deception has become so woven into the fabric of ordinary life that the person who simply, plainly, and consistently tells the truth can feel like the strange one in the room. Honesty has a social cost in many environments, and that cost has been rising. Into all of that noise, into all of that confusion, into all of that relational and cultural fog, the book of Proverbs speaks with startling and almost uncomfortable clarity. It does not deal in abstractions or theological technicalities. It does not offer complicated philosophical frameworks or dense prophetic imagery. It speaks directly, practically, sometimes with the bluntness of someone who has watched the same human patterns play out across enough time to have lost patience with pretense. It was written to make the simple wise and to sharpen the discernment of the experienced. It was written to give ordinary people the tools to navigate an extraordinary degree of complexity without losing their integrity, their clarity, or their way. The 33 lessons gathered here are drawn from Proverbs with one specific purpose in mind: to help you stay grounded, clear-eyed, and anchored to wisdom when everything around you is anything but honest. These are not inspirational platitudes designed to make you feel good for a few minutes before the pressure of ordinary life reasserts itself. They are living, tested truths, forged over millennia of human experience and refined through the ongoing work of God in the lives of people who chose wisdom over convenience. They apply with remarkable specificity to the pressures you are navigating today. Whether those pressures involve a deceptive relationship, a confusing workplace, a manipulative situation you have not yet been able to fully name, or simply the challenge of staying true in a culture that increasingly celebrates performance over substance. Let us go through them one by one, with the care and attention they deserve. Before we move into the first lesson, I want to stop for just a moment and speak to you directly. Not as a viewer, but as a person. If you're watching this video right now, wherever you are in the world, I want you to know that your being here matters. This community stretches across countries and continents, across time zones and languages and life situations that are extraordinarily different from one another. And yet here we are, gathered around the same ancient wisdom, drawn by the same desire to live more faithfully and more clearly. Would you do something for me right now? Drop a comment below and tell me where you are watching from, your city, your country, wherever you are joining us from today. I read those comments, and every time I do, I am genuinely moved, because the geography of this community is extraordinary. People watching from small towns and massive cities, from places of great comfort and places of real struggle, all here for the same reason. That community is something real, and I want you to feel like a part of it. And I want to ask you, with complete sincerity, to subscribe to this channel if you have not already done so. I say this not as a routine request that content creators are expected to make. I say it because I genuinely believe in what we are building here together. This channel exists to bring the depth and power of Scripture into contact with the real, daily challenges of modern life. It exists to make biblical wisdom accessible and genuinely practical, not just intellectually interesting. When you subscribe, you are joining a global community of people who believe that God's Word is alive and active and has something powerful to say right now, today, in the world we are actually living in. So please, subscribe. Let's keep building this together. I also want to warmly invite you to become a channel member. Membership means becoming part of the inner circle of this community, getting early access to videos before they are publicly released, being part of a space where we go deeper together, and supporting the work that makes all of this possible. If this content has added something real to your life, membership is a beautiful way to invest in what we are growing here together. You'll find that option just below this video. It means more than I can adequately express. Now, let us open Proverbs. Lesson 1. The fear of the Lord is where wisdom begins and where it keeps returning. Proverbs 1:7 says, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction." Everything in the book of Proverbs flows from this single declaration, and so it is right that we begin here. Not because it is the most comfortable lesson, it may in fact be the most challenging, but because every other lesson rests upon it. To start anywhere else would be like trying to understand the behavior of a river by studying only its surface currents while ignoring the source from which it flows. The fear of the Lord is not, as it is sometimes misunderstood, a state of cowering terror before an unpredictable deity. It is something more nuanced and far more powerful than that. It is the recognition that God is the ultimate reality, the source of all being, the standard of all truth, the authority before whose judgment every other authority is relative and provisional. To fear the Lord is to align your entire understanding of importance, value, and consequence around this recognition. It is to hold God as the primary reference point for every decision, every relationship, every evaluation of what is real and what matters. And here is where this becomes urgently practical in a world of deception. When your primary orientation is toward God, your susceptibility to human manipulation decreases dramatically. Deception works by exploiting our dependencies and our fears. It exploits our fear of rejection, our hunger for approval, our need to be seen in a particular way by the people whose opinion we care about. When someone tells you what you want to hear, or withholds information you need, or crafts a false impression designed to make you feel a certain way, they are almost always leveraging one of these emotional pressure points. But when the fear of God is genuinely the center of your life, a remarkable shift happens. The approval of people, which deceptive people so skillfully offer and withhold as a tool of manipulation, loses much of its power. You are less susceptible to flattery because your sense of worth is not primarily drawn from human affirmation. You are less susceptible to social pressure because the opinion of God carries more weight than the opinion of the crowd. You are less susceptible to the manipulation of your reputation because your primary concern is not how you appear to others, but what God knows to be true of you. This lesson matters at the beginning because it is the foundation of all the others. You cannot build genuine discernment on the sand of people-pleasing and approval-seeking. You can only build it on the rock of a life genuinely oriented toward God. Return to this lesson every time the others feel hard to apply. The fear of the Lord is not just the beginning of wisdom, it is the place where wisdom keeps coming back to be renewed. Lesson 2. Wisdom calls loudly in the ordinary places of life, but you have to quiet yourself to hear her. Proverbs 1:20-22 says, "Out in the open wisdom calls aloud. She raises her voice in the public square. On top of the wall she cries out. At the city gate she makes her speech. How long will you who are simple love your simple ways? How long will mockers delight in mockery and fools hate knowledge?" One of the most important things to understand about wisdom, and one of the things Proverbs is most insistent about, is that wisdom is not hidden. It is not esoteric knowledge available only to the spiritually elite or the academically credentialed. It does not require a special initiation or a rare encounter with an exceptional teacher. Proverbs presents wisdom as a figure who calls from the most public, ordinary, accessible places, from open streets, from the city gate, from the places where everyone passes through. The implication is significant. Wisdom is available to anyone who is genuinely willing to seek it and humble enough to receive it. The problem has never been that wisdom is rare. The problem is that so many things compete for the attention that wisdom requires. We live in an environment of relentless information saturation, a constant stream of notifications, headlines, opinions, content, and noise that creates the feeling of being very well informed while actually making deep understanding increasingly difficult to achieve. The news cycle moves at a speed that barely allows for reflection. Social platforms are deliberately engineered to capture and hold attention through emotional stimulation rather than through substance. The average person now processes more information in a single day than a literate person in the ancient world would have encountered in a month. And yet, for all of that exposure to information, genuine wisdom feels harder to find, not easier. The noise is louder. The signal is no clearer. What Proverbs is calling for is a different relationship with your attention. It is calling for the discipline of actually stopping to think, not just reacting, not just scrolling, not just absorbing the next piece of content before the last one has been processed. Wisdom requires time and space in which to be heard. She is calling, but the effective call requires a listener who has quieted themselves enough to actually distinguish her voice from all the other voices competing for the same space. This is not a passive skill. It is an active, countercultural discipline in a world that profits from your distraction. Practice it with intention. Lesson 3. Guard your heart, because the deepest deceptions begin from within. Proverbs 4:23 instructs, "Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it." The word "above all else" is worth dwelling on. Not among other things, not as one consideration among many, above all else. This is the priority instruction of the entire practical section of Proverbs' opening chapters, and its placement is not accidental. Everything flows from the heart. Every decision, every relationship, every perception of reality, every response to what you encounter, all of it originates in the condition of your inner life. If deception were purely an external threat, something that only came at you from outside, from dishonest people in the world around you, then guarding yourself would be a matter of identifying and avoiding those people. Useful, certainly. But the more challenging and more important dimension of this lesson is the internal one. The human heart, without discipline and honest self-examination, is extraordinarily capable of deceiving itself. We tell ourselves stories about the situations we are in, stories that protect our self-image, that justify our choices, that make our preferences look like principles. We convince ourselves that the relationship is fundamentally healthy, despite the recurring patterns that any outside observer would immediately recognize as destructive. We dismiss warning signs about a person because we want them to be who they present themselves as being, or because the investment we have already made in the relationship makes the truth about who they are too costly to fully acknowledge. We interpret the actions of people we want to trust charitably and the actions of people we already distrust uncharitably, adjusting our interpretation to fit the conclusion we arrived at before the evidence was fully examined. Self-deception is the soil in which external deception takes root most effectively. The person who is honest with themselves, ruthlessly, compassionately, persistently honest about their own motivations, their own blind spots, their own emotional vulnerabilities, is dramatically harder to manipulate than the person who maintains a flattering and not entirely accurate picture of their own discernment. Guarding your heart means taking your inner life seriously as a practice. It means maintaining a regular, honest accounting of what you actually feel, what you actually want, what you're actually afraid of, and how those things might be shaping your perception of what is true. It means being willing to receive correction from wise friends, from the Word of God, from the quiet voice of conscience, even when that correction is uncomfortable. The guarded heart is not a hardened heart. It is a disciplined one, and in a world of deception, it is your most important piece of protection. Lesson 4. The wise person listens before speaking and keeps listening after they think they understand. Proverbs 18:2 states plainly, "Fools find no pleasure in understanding, but delight in airing their own opinions." And Proverbs 18:13 adds, "To answer before listening, that is folly and shame." In a culture that rewards the confident voice, the quick take, and the bold declaration, these verses are quietly revolutionary. We live in an environment that consistently privileges speaking over listening. The person who speaks first, who speaks with certainty, who delivers their assessment without hesitation or qualification, is often perceived as the most authoritative figure in any given conversation. Speed and confidence are read as signals of competence. Hesitation and careful consideration are sometimes misread as uncertainty or weakness. Proverbs has watched this pattern play out across thousands of years of human experience and identifies it clearly as the mark of foolishness. Not because certainty is bad in itself, but because certainty that precedes genuine understanding is a distortion, a performance of knowledge rather than the possession of it. And the person who performs knowledge is not only less accurate than the person who actually seeks it, they are also far less effective at detecting deception. Here is the practical edge of this lesson. Real wisdom, the kind that actually helps you navigate dishonesty and complexity, is built on listening. It requires the patience to hear what is actually being said before you form your response. It requires the discipline to let a person fully reveal themselves before you decide what you think of them. It requires the attentiveness to notice not just what someone says, but how they say it, what they emphasize, what they avoid, where the energy in their communication is directed, and how the story they tell today compares to the story they told in a different context or a different conversation. Many people expose their true motives and the inconsistencies in their accounts simply if you give them enough time and space to keep talking. They say things they did not intend to say. They contradict themselves in ways they would have avoided if you had asked the questions that would have put them on alert. The details that matter most often emerge not in the headline of the conversation, but in the margins, in the asides, the qualifications, the places where the story briefly does not quite add up. But you only notice those things if you are genuinely listening. If you are already formulating your response, already committed to your interpretation, already prepared to deliver your verdict, you will miss exactly what matters most. Slow down. Ask questions. Listen longer than feels comfortable. The wise person does not perform understanding. They actually seek it. Lesson 5. Be careful who you trust with your confidence, and watch how people speak about others. Proverbs 11:13 warns, "A gossip betrays a confidence, but a trustworthy person keeps a secret." And Proverbs 20:19 adds, "A gossip betrays a confidence, so avoid anyone who talks too much." Right, here is a test for the people around you that is reliable enough to apply with some consistency. Observe how they talk about others when those others are not present. Not in a single instance. One conversation is not enough data, but as a pattern over time. If someone is consistently eager to share confidential information about others, if they regularly give you detailed accounts of other people's failures, secrets, struggles, and private affairs, they are demonstrating something important about who they are as a keeper of confidences. The logic is straightforward. Even if the conclusion is uncomfortable, the same ease with which they share someone else's private information with you is the ease with which they will share your private information with someone else. It is not that they are necessarily malicious in every instance. Sometimes gossip is driven more by a desire for social connection or for the feeling of being interesting than by genuine ill will toward the person being discussed. But the effect is the same. They cannot be trusted with what matters most to you, because the boundary between what is shared and what is held in confidence is not firmly maintained in their character. This lesson is not a call to suspicious paranoia or to the kind of relational fortress building that leaves you isolated and unable to form genuine connections. Human beings need vulnerability, need the ability to share struggles and fears and failures with others who will hold those things with care. But that vulnerability must be offered gradually and selectively to people who have demonstrated over time that they are genuinely trustworthy, not assumed about everyone, not extended as an act of good faith before the evidence has been examined. The markers of trustworthiness in this regard are relatively straightforward. People who speak well of others when those others are not present, who maintain appropriate discretion about information shared in confidence, who do not seem to derive particular pleasure from being in possession of private details about other people's lives. These are the people to whom greater vulnerability can reasonably be extended over time. Find those people. Invest in those relationships. Guard carefully what you share with everyone else. Lesson 6. Flattery is a net, not a compliment. Learn to tell the difference. Proverbs 29:5 says, "Those who flatter their neighbors are spreading nets for their feet." And Proverbs 26:28 warns sharply, "A lying tongue hates those it hurts, and a flattering mouth works ruin." This lesson cuts against one of the most enjoyable forms of deception, which makes it one of the most dangerous. Flattery is praise offered not because it is truthful, but because the person offering it wants something, either something tangible and specific, or simply the favorable disposition that comes from making someone feel seen and appreciated. It is praise designed to lower your guard, to create a feeling of warmth and connection toward the flatterer, and to position them advantageously for whatever they are ultimately after. The problem with flattery is precisely that it feels wonderful. We are all, to some degree, hungry to be seen, to have our efforts acknowledged, our intelligence recognized, our worth affirmed. When someone comes along and offers us that affirmation with apparent sincerity and specificity, a part of us wants to receive it gratefully, to relax in the warmth of it, to feel more favorably toward the person who has offered it. This is completely human, and the person using flattery deliberately knows it. They are exploiting the gap between the praise you receive and the praise you have actually been given. Learning to distinguish between genuine appreciation and manipulative flattery requires honest self-examination. Genuine appreciation tends to be specific, proportionate, and offered without obvious stakes. It does not create a feeling of obligation or produce a particular discomfort, even as it pleases. Flattery, by contrast, often has a slight quality of excess, a degree of praise that, examined honestly, goes beyond what the circumstances actually warrant. It is frequently timed in ways that are not accidental, offered just before a request, just when an obstacle needs to be removed, just when alignment needs to be purchased. And here is the deeper warning that Proverbs issues: the flattering mouth works ruin. The goal of flattery is not your elevation, it is your use. The person who flatters you is not your advocate. They are your manager, temporarily, keeping you in a position that serves their purposes. Genuine appreciation builds you up freely and without agenda. Flattery positions you to be useful. Train your discernment to know the difference. Lesson 7. Welcome honest rebuke as the gift it actually is. Proverbs 27:6 says, "Wounds from a friend can be trusted, but an enemy multiplies kisses." And Proverbs 12:1 adds, "Whoever loves discipline loves knowledge, but whoever hates correction is stupid." Proverbs does not mince its words. The verse above is one of the bluntest in the entire book, and it needs to be, because the distinction it is drawing goes against one of our strongest natural inclinations. We tend to experience challenge, confrontation, and correction as threats. We classify people who push back against us, who point out our blind spots, who tell us things we did not want to hear, as difficult or unkind. And we tend to classify people who agree with us, affirm us, and tell us what we want to hear as supportive, understanding, and genuinely on our side. Proverbs completely inverts this evaluation and insists that the inversion is not counterintuitive. It is simply accurate. The person who cares enough about you to tell you the truth, even when the truth is uncomfortable, even when it costs them something in the relationship, even when it makes the conversation awkward and difficult, that person is offering you something genuinely valuable. Their words may sting, they may land in places that are tender, but they are true, and truth is what keeps you from walking confidently in a direction that leads somewhere you do not want to go. The person who multiplies kisses, who constantly validates, constantly affirms, constantly agrees with your assessment of yourself and your situation, may in fact be the more dangerous presence in your life. They are allowing you to operate on the basis of incomplete or inaccurate information, because correcting you would risk the relationship or create an uncomfortable moment. And that comfort, purchased at the price of your clarity, is a form of harm dressed as care. In a world where flattery is abundant and honest feedback is rare, the people willing to tell you the truth are worth protecting with extraordinary care. Do not make it too costly for them to be honest with you. Receive correction without defensiveness, without punishment, without the kind of emotional reaction that teaches the people around you that your comfort is more important than your clarity. The capacity to genuinely welcome honest rebuke is itself a mark of wisdom, and it is one of the most important things you can cultivate. Lesson 8. A good name is built on substance, not performance. Proverbs 22:1 declares, A good name is more desirable than great riches. To be esteemed is better than silver or gold. And Proverbs 10:7 adds, "The name of the righteous is used in blessings, but the name of the wicked will rot." And we live in an era obsessed with personal branding, with the deliberate and careful management of how one is perceived by others. People curate their online presence with a level of strategic intention that earlier generations would have found startling. Corporations employ professionals specifically to manage narrative and control the impressions that stakeholders form. Public figures move through the world with media training designed to ensure that whatever they actually think and feel, what they project, is precisely calibrated to produce maximum approval. There is nothing inherently wrong with caring about how you are perceived. Reputation matters, practically and relationally, but Proverbs draws a sharp distinction between a name built on managed impression and a name built on genuine character. And it insists that only one of these has lasting value. A reputation built on performance is inherently fragile because it depends on the successful maintenance of a carefully constructed narrative. When the reality behind the performance is substantially different from the performance itself, there is a structural instability, a gap between surface and substance that is always at risk of collapsing. And in the collapse, the damage to reputation is severe precisely because the gap was large and the investment in concealing it was significant. A reputation built on genuine character, on the consistent alignment of private behavior and public presentation, on the long, unglamorous work of actually being who you say you are across a variety of circumstances and relationships over time, is remarkably durable. It survives scrutiny because it has nothing to hide. It survives setbacks because genuine character includes honest acknowledgement of failure and genuine commitment to growth. It survives the attacks of those who would damage it because the testimony of consistent conduct over time is more powerful than any accusation. Build your name on substance. It will take longer. There will be moments when the person managing their image seems to be getting ahead of you, when the polished performance seems more rewarded than the unglamorous reality. But what is built on truth has a foundation that what is built on performance never will, and in the long run, the difference becomes visible to everyone. Lesson 9. Pride is the blindfold that deception slips onto your face. Proverbs 16:18 warns, "Pride goes before destruction, a haughty spirit before a fall." And Proverbs 11:2 adds, "When pride comes, then comes disgrace, but with humility comes wisdom." There is a particular irony embedded in this lesson that is worth sitting with. Pride makes us uniquely vulnerable to deception, and it does so in part because proud people typically consider themselves to be among the least susceptible to it. The proud person is confident in their judgment, certain of their read on situations and people, comfortable in the conviction that they are too experienced, too intelligent, too sophisticated to be taken in by manipulation. And that very confidence, that settled self-assurance, is precisely the opening that a skilled deceiver looks for. The person who believes they cannot be fooled is far more susceptible to being fooled than the person who approaches situations with genuine humility. This is not merely an observation about personality types, it is a description of how information processing works. A proud person does not ask the questions that might reveal their own misunderstanding, because asking would imply uncertainty that conflicts with their self-image. They do not seek the counsel that might correct their course, because seeking implies inadequacy. They do not acknowledge early warning signs, because acknowledging them would mean admitting that the confident judgment they announced publicly was wrong, and so the errors compound. The deceptions deepen. By the time the disaster arrives, it has been given a very long runway on which to build speed. Humility, by contrast, is a form of epistemic openness that pride forecloses. The humble person can ask, "Am I missing something here?" They can hear feedback that conflicts with their initial assessment without experiencing it as an attack on their identity. They can change their position when the evidence demands it without experiencing the change as a humiliation. They can say, "I was wrong about this," as an honest statement of fact rather than a devastating loss of face. In a world of deception, humility is not a vulnerability. It is one of your sharpest instruments. The person who knows they might be wrong is much more likely to find out whether they are than the person who has decided they cannot be. Lesson 10. The righteous path keeps getting clearer. Keep walking it. Proverbs 4:18-19 says, "The path of the righteous is like the morning sun, shining ever brighter till the full light of day. But the way of the wicked is like deep darkness. They do not know what makes them stumble." This lesson operates on a timeline that our impatient hearts sometimes struggle to honor. The brightness of the righteous path is not necessarily greatest at the beginning. At the start, you may have only enough light to see the next few steps, enough to know that this direction is right, even when the full destination is not yet visible. But Proverbs promises that the path gets brighter as you walk it, not because the external world becomes less complex or deceptive, but because the person walking the path develops increasing capacity to see and understand. This is a description of how wisdom actually forms in a life. It is not a sudden illumination that appears all at once. It is a gradual, cumulative brightening that comes from the consistent practice of integrity over time. The person who has spent years refusing to lie, who has maintained the discipline of honesty even in small things, even when a convenient untruth would have made life easier in the moment, develops a sensitivity to dishonesty that serves them in every situation. They can feel when something is off, when the story does not quite add up, when the presentation is a little too polished, when the person across from them is performing rather than being genuine. They cannot always articulate exactly what triggered that perception, but they have learned to trust it. The wicked path, by contrast, grows darker as it is traveled. The person who has built their life on deception finds their ability to trust others and to accurately assess whether others can be trusted, progressively compromised. When you yourself operate through falsehood, when your default mode is the management of impression rather than the communication of reality, you lose the calibration that honest living provides. You begin to assume that everyone around you is doing what you are doing. Every act of genuine kindness looks calculated. Every honest disclosure looks like a strategic move. The darkness in which you operate makes it impossible to accurately read the light in others. Walk the righteous path consistently through the unglamorous ordinary days as much as through the dramatic ones. The brightness accumulates, the discernment grows. In a dark world, the person walking in an ever-brightening light has significant advantages over everyone stumbling around trying to see. Lesson 11. Watch patterns, not performances. Behavior is truthful even when speech is not. Proverbs 20:11 observes, "Even small children are known by their actions, so is their conduct really pure and upright." And Proverbs 21:2 adds, "A person may think their own ways are right, but the Lord weighs the heart." People reveal who they are over time, through the accumulation of choices made across a variety of circumstances, many of which are not the dramatic high-stakes moments where people are consciously performing for an audience. They reveal themselves in how they treat people who cannot benefit them, in how they respond to situations that inconvenience them, in how they conduct themselves when they believe no one of consequence is watching. They reveal themselves in whether the story they tell today is consistent with the story they told 6 months ago, in whether the values they articulate align with the choices they make when living those values costs something real, in whether their public face and their private face are recognizably the same person. Skilled deception depends on your focus being on the performance rather than the pattern. Any single interaction can be carefully managed, can be crafted to create whatever impression is desired. A skilled deceiver can make any given conversation look exactly as they want it to look, can produce the emotional experience in you that they intend, can leave you feeling whatever they have decided it serves them to have you feel. But sustaining a false pattern across a long enough timeline, across enough different contexts and relationships and unforeseen circumstances, is vastly more difficult. Inconsistencies emerge. Someone who has told one story to one person and a different version to another will eventually encounter the moment when those two people compare notes. Someone who presents a public persona of generosity and care while privately treating others with contempt will eventually be seen by someone whose testimony cannot be easily dismissed. The contradictions between what is said and what is done accumulate until they can no longer be explained away by coincidence or misunderstanding. Watch the pattern. Give it the time it needs to become clear. Trust what you see consistently over what is declared persuasively. And when what is being declared and what is being demonstrated don't match, let behavior be your primary text. Lesson 12. The righteous are bold as a lion. Do not confuse silence with wisdom. Proverbs 28:1 declares, "The wicked flee though no one pursues, but the righteous are as bold as a lion." There is a form of silence that presents itself as wisdom, but is actually a kind of cowardice, the chronic refusal to say the true and necessary thing because it will create discomfort, the systematic avoidance of confrontation, not out of strategic timing, but out of an inability to tolerate the friction of honest engagement. This is not what Proverbs endorses. Proverbs calls the righteous bold as a lion. In a world of lies, the courageous voice of truth is one of the most powerful forces available. When someone is operating in deception and everyone in their sphere either knows it or suspects it but remains silent, that silence functions as an endorsement. It allows the deception to continue and expand. It communicates to the deceiver that no one is going to hold them accountable. It communicates to everyone else watching that honesty is not actually valued in this environment, only the appearance of it. And the person who is being harmed by the deception, who perhaps most needs someone to speak truthfully, is left without an advocate. When one person speaks with clarity and honesty about what they are actually observing, the entire dynamic of a situation can shift. Not because honesty is magic, but because it introduces reality into an environment that has been operating on the basis of fiction, and reality, once introduced with sufficient force and specificity, is very hard to banish again. The wicked flee, though no one pursues, because living in deception creates its own internal pressure. The constant anxiety of a person who knows that reality and their account of it do not match, who is always alert for the moment when someone might notice the gap. The righteous do not need to flee. They have nothing to hide and nothing to fear from scrutiny. Their boldness comes not from aggression or combativeness, but from the settled confidence of a clear conscience, and it is deeply disorienting to anyone whose power depends on the silence of the people around them. Develop this boldness. Speak when speaking is needed. Choose your moments wisely, but do not let the chronic discomfort of confrontation become a reason to leave truth unspoken. Lesson 13. Trustworthy messengers are rarer than you think. Value them accordingly. Proverbs 25:13 says, "Like a cool drink of water in the sweltering heat of harvest time is a trustworthy messenger to the one who sends him. He refreshes the spirit of his master." The image Proverbs uses here is a remarkably physical one. Imagine working in a harvest field in the full heat of summer, with the labor of the work and the weight of the heat pressing down equally. Someone comes to you with a drink that has been cooled. The shock of that relief, the physical pleasure of the contrast, the way it restores your capacity to keep going. That is the image Proverbs reaches for to describe not a competent messenger, not a fast one, not a clever one, a trustworthy one. This specificity matters. In a world of information, the problem is rarely the absence of people willing to communicate. It is the difficulty of finding people who will communicate accurately, who will tell you what is true rather than what will produce a favorable reaction, who will convey what they actually observed rather than the edited version that makes them look better, who will bring you the information you need to make good decisions even when that information is uncomfortable to deliver. In any organizational context, any community, any relational network, the flow of accurate information determines the quality of decisions that can be made. If the people communicating are filtering information through their own interests, softening it to avoid conflict, emphasizing what advances their position, and downplaying what does not, the result is that leaders and participants are making decisions based on a reality that does not correspond to what is actually happening. The consequences of this are visible everywhere, at every scale of organization. The trustworthy messenger, the person who tells you what is true consistently, even when a different account would serve them better, is worth protecting, valuing, and recognizing explicitly. When you find people who play this role in your life, who you can trust to give you an accurate account, treat those relationships as precious. And aspire with full intention to be exactly that kind of person for the people who depend on you. Lesson 14. Do not make promises you have not counted the full cost of. Proverbs 20:25 warns, "It is a trap to dedicate something rashly and only later to consider one's vows." And Proverbs 13:12 reminds us, "Hope deferred makes the heart sick, but a longing fulfilled is a tree of life." Much of the most damaging low-grade deception in ordinary relationships does not originate from deliberate malice. It comes from the casual habit of promising things without having actually thought through what keeping that promise will require. It comes from saying yes in the warmth of a generous impulse, in the emotional resonance of a good moment, without the cold calculation of whether the commitment being made is actually one that can and will be honored in ordinary circumstances, when the warmth has faded and other priorities have reasserted themselves. This is the trap Proverbs identifies, not the calculated lie, but the rash vow. The commitment made too quickly, with too little consideration of what fulfilling it would actually demand. And the harm on the receiving end is real. The person who reorganized their hope, their plans, their expectations around what was promised, who built something on the foundation of a commitment that turned out not to be structurally sound, suffers a genuine wound when the promise does not materialize. Hope deferred makes the heart sick. That sickness is not metaphorical. It is a real experience of disappointment that accumulates across every unfulfilled promise, every commitment that quietly expired without explanation, every expectation that was carefully managed in the moment of commitment, but forgotten in the ordinary days that followed. And when a person experiences this repeatedly from the same source, the sickness transforms into a loss of trust that is very difficult to restore. Wisdom calls for a more careful, slower relationship with commitment. Say less, mean more, commit only to what you have genuinely counted the cost of. And when others make large promises with surprising ease, when someone gives you their word about significant things without any visible indication that they have thought through what keeping that word will require, Let this pattern inform your assessment of what can reasonably be expected from them. Lesson 15. Choose your advisors with more care than you choose your investments. Proverbs 12:5 says, "The plans of the righteous are just, but the advice of the wicked is deceitful." And Proverbs 15:22 adds, "Plans fail for lack of counsel, but with many advisors they succeed." These two verses, placed alongside each other, create the full picture that neither creates alone. The first tells you that you genuinely need counsel, that the person who plans without seeking wisdom from others is working with a systematically incomplete picture. The second tells you that not all counsel is created equal, and that advice offered with apparent care and sophistication can in fact be designed to serve the advisor rather than the person being advised. The need for wise counsel is not weakness. It is the acknowledgement of a simple reality. None of us can see our own blind spots. We cannot evaluate our own plans objectively because we are emotionally invested in them. We cannot identify the assumptions we are making that need to be examined, because from the inside they do not feel like assumptions. They feel like obvious facts. We cannot see what our approach looks like to someone without our history, our fears, our hopes, and our prior commitments shaping the view. The person who brings a genuinely different perspective, who has relevant experience, who cares more about your actual outcome than about your approval of their advice, that person can see things you cannot, and their input is valuable in proportion to its accuracy and honesty. But the quality of your counsel depends entirely on the quality of your counselors, and not all of those who present themselves as advisors are equally trustworthy. Some have interests that align perfectly with a particular recommendation. Some have a pattern of advice that, examined over time, consistently produces outcomes that benefit them more than the person they are advising. Some tell you what you want to hear, because telling you what you need to hear risks the relationship they want to maintain with you. Look carefully at the track record of anyone whose counsel you rely on. Look at what their advice has produced, not just what it promised. Look at whether they are willing to tell you things that make the conversation uncomfortable, or whether they have learned to say what keeps you coming back. Look at what they have to gain from the direction they are pointing you. Wise counsel is genuinely priceless. Bad counsel offered at the wrong moment can undo what was built over years. Choose your advisors with the full weight of that reality in mind. Lesson 16. Your words are seeds. Every one of them will produce something. Proverbs 18:21 declares, "The tongue has the power of life and death, and those who love it will eat its fruit." And Proverbs 12:18 adds, "The words of the reckless pierce like swords, but the tongue of the wise brings healing." In a world where language is routinely weaponized, where words are deployed strategically to manipulate, to wound, to confuse, to create impressions that do not correspond to reality, to shift responsibility and manage perception, Proverbs calls us to a standard that is genuinely radical in its simplicity. Let your words be true, and let them be kind, and understand that they will produce fruit in proportion to the quality of the seed they represent. Every word you speak is a seed. It is dropped into the soil of someone else's mind and heart, and it will grow into something. The encouraging word spoken to someone at a critical moment can take root in a way that shapes the course of their life. The damaging word, spoken carelessly in a moment of frustration or anger, can lodge in a place so deep that it is still producing pain years later, long after the speaker has forgotten they said it. Words have weight far beyond their syllable count, and most of us, if we are honest, have an imprecise sense of the cumulative effect of our speech on the people who receive it. Deceptive people are frequently very skilled with words precisely because they understand this power and deploy it deliberately. They know how to use language to create impressions without technically lying, to imply things through tone and emphasis and selection, to make you feel certain ways without saying anything that could be pointed to and challenged. They are masters of the strategic half-truth, the technically accurate statement that leaves an inaccurate impression, the generous compliment that functions as a setup rather than a gift. Against this kind of verbal sophistication, the wisdom of Proverbs is not to become equally clever. It is to become deeply, uncompromisingly committed to words that actually correspond to reality. That commitment, practiced consistently over time, creates a kind of influence that manipulation cannot match. The influence of being genuinely trusted. And in a world where genuine trust is increasingly rare, the person who has built it through consistent, honest speech possesses something that money cannot buy. Lesson 17. Dishonesty carries a hidden cost that compounds every day. Proverbs 12:19 says, "Truthful lips endure forever, but a lying tongue lasts only a moment." And Proverbs 10:9 adds, "Whoever walks in integrity walks securely, but whoever takes crooked paths will be found out." Deception appears from certain angles and at certain distances to be a viable strategy. In the short term, a carefully constructed lie can produce real advantages, securing a deal that honesty would have lost, avoiding a consequence that the truth would have triggered, creating a favorable impression that accurate self-presentation would not have generated. And because the consequences of dishonesty are not always immediate, because the gap between the deception and the reckoning can sometimes be months or even years, many people operate with the implicit conclusion that the strategy works. Proverbs has watched this conclusion reached and then disproved across every generation and every culture for thousands of years, and its verdict is clear. Truth endures. Lies do not. This is not primarily a moral assertion. It is a practical observation about the structure of reality. Every lie creates a maintenance burden. It must be remembered because inconsistency with it is evidence of the lie's existence. It must be reinforced because the environment around it continues to generate new circumstances that might expose it. It must be supported by additional lies as those new circumstances emerge, and those supporting lies require their own maintenance structures, and the architecture of the deceptive life becomes progressively more complex and fragile until the structural weight of the whole thing collapses under the pressure of reality. Integrity, by contrast, is self-maintaining in a way that requires no special effort. The person who walks in integrity does not need to remember what they said because they always say what is true. They do not need to manage impressions across different audiences because their reality and their presentation are the same thing in every conversation. They do not carry the specific anxiety of the person who knows that reality and their account of it are not the same. They walk securely, as Proverbs says, and that security is not just a feeling. It is the actual experience of a person who has nothing to hide, moving through a world that cannot find anything to use against them. Over time, this is not merely morally admirable, it is dramatically more sustainable and dramatically less exhausting than the alternative. Lesson 18. Seek wisdom before you commit, not to justify what you have already decided. Proverbs 14:12 warns, "There is a way that appears to be right, but in the end it leads to death." And Proverbs 16:25 repeats this almost word for word, and in the ancient world, verbal repetition was a signal of paramount importance. When a truth appears twice in nearly identical form, the text is using one of its most emphatic tools to say, pay very close attention to this. The way that appears right but leads to destruction rarely announces itself honestly. That is precisely what makes it dangerous. It presents itself as wisdom. It comes with apparently sound logic, with seemingly compelling evidence, with the endorsement of people whose opinion carries weight, with a feeling of rightness that can be remarkably convincing, even when it is pointing in precisely the wrong direction. The most dangerous wrong turns in life are rarely the ones that felt wrong from the beginning. They are the ones that felt right, that were actively chosen because they seemed like the wise and reasonable option. This is why wisdom must be genuinely sought before decisions are made, not recruited after the fact to provide intellectual cover for what we have already emotionally decided we want. There is a kind of thinking that masquerades as wisdom, that starts with an emotionally attractive conclusion and then works backward to construct a rational-sounding case for arriving at it. Proverbs is not impressed by this activity. The sophistication of the argument does not change the direction of the path. And the path that leads to destruction has accommodated many sophisticated arguments in its history before committing. Stop. Sit with the decision longer than feels comfortable. Deliberately seek out the best counter-arguments to the position you are currently inclined to take. Ask the people who will tell you the honest truth, not only the ones who are likely to agree. Follow the path forward in your mind, not just to the attractive moment of the commitment, but to where this path actually leads in 6 months, 2 years, a decade, if the assumptions on which it rests turn out to be accurate or inaccurate. The willingness to do that patient, honest, uncomfortable work before committing is the mark of wisdom, and it is one of the most powerful forms of protection against the deceptions that present themselves as opportunities. Lesson 19. Patience is not passivity. It is the discipline that deception cannot survive. Proverbs 21:5 says, "The plans of the diligent lead to profit as surely as haste leads to poverty." And Proverbs 19:2 adds, "Desire without knowledge is not good. How much more will hasty feet miss the way?" One of the most reliable tactics in the toolkit of deception is the artificial creation of urgency. This opportunity won't last. You need to decide now. There are other people interested in this. I can't hold it for long. If you wait to think about it, it will be gone. The pressure of a deadline, real or manufactured, is specifically designed to short-circuit the process of careful thought. And it works with surprising effectiveness because the human mind processes differently under perceived time pressure. Under urgency, we prioritize speed over accuracy. We rely on surface impressions rather than careful analysis. We become more susceptible to the emotional framing of a situation and less capable of examining the underlying facts objectively. And this is not only true when deception is deliberate. Proverbs identifies haste as the enemy of good decision-making in its own right, quite apart from any intentional manipulation. When we are rushed by external pressure, by impatience, by the discomfort of sitting with uncertainty, we miss things that would have been visible with more time. We accept the surface presentation because examining what is underneath it feels like it requires more time and energy than we have available. We commit based on incomplete information that patience would have allowed us to gather. Wisdom cultivates patience as a protective discipline. Not the passivity of the person who never acts, who uses deliberation as an excuse to avoid commitment, but the deliberate, active patience of someone who understands the difference between the urgency they feel and the urgency that actually exists. When someone is pushing hard for your immediate decision, ask yourself what purpose the urgency serves. Genuine opportunities do not, as a rule, require you to abandon your judgment to capture them. And when you discover that something which seemed urgent yesterday is still available after you have taken the time to pray, reflect, examine, and consult, you can commit to it with a quality of confidence that the pressured decision never could have had. Lesson 20, what you actually pursue reveals what you actually believe. Proverbs 21:21 says, "Whoever pursues righteousness and love finds life, prosperity and honor." And Proverbs 11:19 adds, "Truly the righteous attain life, but whoever pursues evil finds death." The distance between what people say they value and what they actually pursue is one of the most revealing gaps in human life. It is very easy to articulate noble values, to speak of honesty, of integrity, of care for others, of commitment to truth, in the context where such articulation is well received. But the actual content of a person's character is not visible in what they say about their values. It is visible in what they pursue with their actual time, their actual energy, their actual willingness to pay a cost. This principle applies to discernment in a particularly interesting way. A person who genuinely pursues truth, who makes the consistent, costly choice to be honest even when honesty is socially inconvenient, to acknowledge what they actually observe even when the observation is uncomfortable, to examine assumptions honestly even when the examination is threatening to conclusions they are invested in, that person becomes, over time, genuinely better at finding truth. The persistent pursuit of something develops the faculties that make finding it more likely. The person who chooses honesty in small things develops a sensitivity to dishonesty that serves them in large things. Conversely, the person who makes consistent small compromises, who finds it easy to shade the truth when the stakes feel low, who gets comfortable with the selective presentation of facts to manage impressions, who learns to tell different versions of events to different audiences, is developing the very habits of mind that make them less able to detect the same patterns in others. When you become comfortable with self-deception, other people's deception becomes harder to see clearly. Choose your pursuits with the full awareness that they are in the business of choosing the person you are becoming. Every consistent choice is a vote for a particular direction of character development. Vote deliberately. Lesson 21. Pleasant words can conceal violent intentions. Pay attention to what lies beneath. Proverbs 10:11 says, "The mouth of the righteous is a fountain of life, but the mouth of the wicked conceals violence." And Proverbs 26:24-26 adds, "Enemies disguise themselves with their lips, but in their hearts they harbor deceit. Though their speech is charming, do not believe them, for 7 abominations fill their hearts. Their malice may be concealed by deception, but their wickedness will be exposed in the assembly." This lesson exposes one of the most important things to understand about sophisticated deception. It is almost never neutral in its ultimate intention. Behind the charming presentation, the smooth words, the carefully calibrated warmth, there is often something being concealed, and Proverbs tells us plainly that what is frequently concealed is something genuinely harmful, not uncomfortable, not merely self-interested. Violent, meaning intending real damage to real people in service of real goals. The person who is genuinely out to harm you will almost never announce that intent. They will, in the great majority of cases, present themselves quite differently, as helpful, as caring, as uniquely understanding of your situation, as particularly well-positioned to assist. The pleasant surface is not incidental to the deception. It is the mechanism of it. The warmth is the access. The apparent care is the way in. This does not mean that everyone who is kind or pleasant or agreeable should be regarded with suspicion. The overwhelming majority of pleasant people are simply pleasant, and genuine warmth is one of the great gifts of human relationship. But it does mean that surface presentation cannot be the primary basis for trust. And it does mean that when something feels slightly off beneath the pleasant surface, when there is a vague unease that you cannot quite articulate, when the warmth, somehow does not feel entirely organic, when the interest in your situation seems slightly too calibrated, those perceptions deserve to be taken seriously rather than immediately dismissed as uncharitable. The righteous person's speech is a fountain of life, not a strategy, not a performance, a genuine outflow of character that benefits the people it reaches. Learn to tell the difference, not by analyzing the words, but by observing what the words produce over time in the life of the relationship. Lesson 22. Do not project your motives onto others. Read what is actually there. Proverbs 16:2 observes, "All a person's ways seem pure to them, but motives are weighed by the Lord." And Proverbs 21:2 repeats, "A person may think their own ways are right, but the Lord weighs the heart." One of the most elegant traps of self-deception, and one that leaves well-intentioned people repeatedly blindsided, is the unconscious assumption that others share the same basic motivational structure that we do. If we are generally honest, we tend to interpret ambiguous behavior charitably, assuming that others, like us, are trying to do the right thing, even when they fall short. If we would not lie in a particular situation, we have genuine difficulty believing that someone else would, that someone would look us in the eyes and simply say something they know to be false. But here is what Proverbs presses us to understand. Other people's motives are genuinely their own. They are not always what they appear. They are not always what we would assume if we were in their position. And most importantly, the people holding those motives are not always aware of their true nature themselves. The self-deception described in these verses is not limited to deliberate manipulation. People engage in motivated reasoning constantly, constructing justifications for what they do that feel genuinely true from the inside, even when they are significantly distorted by self-interest. The person who is deceiving you is not always consciously lying. Sometimes they have convinced themselves of what they are saying, and that conviction makes them more persuasive and more difficult to read, not less. This is why the Lord weighs the heart rather than the presentation. Only God sees with full clarity what is actually driving a person's choices. Our responsibility is not to achieve that divine clarity, we will not, but to remain honestly observant, rather than allowing our desire for trust to override what our eyes and experience are actually showing us. Love people generously, extend charity broadly, but let behavior over time be the primary evidence, and when what you observe consistently does not align with what you are told, trust what you observe. Lesson 23. A generous spirit is harder to manipulate than a grasping one. Proverbs 11:24-25 says, "One person gives freely, yet gains even more. Another withholds unduly, but comes to poverty. A generous person will prosper. Whoever refreshes others will be refreshed." And Proverbs 22:9 adds, "The generous will themselves be blessed, for they share their food with the poor." Greed and the fear of lack are among the primary levers that deception pulls. The promise of easy gain, of getting more than you gave, of access to advantage that others do not have, this is the architecture of a remarkable number of traps. The opportunity that seems too good to be true usually is. The deal that promises returns that normal life does not produce usually carries a hidden cost that the offer has been carefully designed not to disclose. The scheme that requires you to act quickly, to keep it confidential from people who might talk you out of it, to get in before the window closes. These features are not coincidental. They are the structural signature of manipulation. And the person who is genuinely generous in spirit, who is not driven by a relentless, anxious focus on getting the better end of every exchange, who does not experience the world primarily through the lens of what can be extracted from it, is fundamentally less susceptible to these particular forms of manipulation. Not because they are naive about the existence of greed in others, but because the emotional lever of "you could get so much more than you are getting" simply does not have the same grip on a person who has made peace with giving freely. Generosity also builds relational capital that functions as a form of protection. People protect those who have been generous with them. They warn them when danger approaches. They advocate for them in rooms where they are not present. They return what was given, often multiplied, in ways that could not have been predicted when the original generosity was extended. The generous spirit, counterintuitively, ends up in a better practical position in many situations than the purely self-interested one, and far less frequently in the position of having been manipulated through the exploitation of greed. Lesson 24. Protect your composure, because anger is the enemy's favorite opening. Proverbs 14:29 says, "Whoever is patient has great understanding, but one who is quick-tempered displays folly." And Proverbs 29:11 adds, "Fools give full vent to their rage, but the wise bring calm in the end." And Proverbs 15:18 reminds us, "A hot-tempered person stirs up conflict, but the one who is patient calms a quarrel." Anger is one of the most commonly exploited levers in the toolkit of manipulation, and it is exploited with such regularity because it works so reliably. When you are genuinely angry, your thinking narrows in ways that are both measurable and predictable. Your attention focuses tightly on the source of the anger and on whatever response the anger is generating, at the expense of the broader view that accurate assessment requires. You become less creative, less open to alternative interpretations of events, less capable of distinguishing between what is important and what is merely urgent. You are far more likely to say things in the heat of the moment that you would not have said with your full faculties available, to make commitments in emotional intensity that cool reflection would never have endorsed, to publicly adopt positions that you will later need to walk back in ways that are embarrassing and costly. Skilled manipulators know this precisely and use it with real sophistication. They provoke anger deliberately. They say something designed to outrage, to wound, to produce the reactive emotional state that makes a person easy to manage. The provocation can be subtle, a condescending remark that implies disrespect, a dismissal of something you care about, a statement that attributes to you motives or beliefs that are insulting or false. The specific content matters less than the emotional result. An angry person is far easier to direct than a calm one, and the direction they can be pointed toward can serve the provocateur's purposes in ways that the calm person would have immediately recognized and declined. The wise person's composure in the face of provocation is not emotional deadness or detachment from genuine feeling. It is the discipline of choosing a response rather than simply generating a reaction. This is the person who keeps their clarity when the environment around them is specifically designed to take it away. When someone pushes your anger button, notice that it is being pushed. Ask what purpose the provocation serves. Take the time you need to respond from a position of actual thought rather than pure feeling. This is not weakness. It is one of your most powerful forms of self-protection, and it deprives your adversary of exactly the leverage they were hoping to create. Lesson 25. Test what you hear before you act on it or repeat it. Proverbs 14:15 says, "The simple believe anything, but the prudent give thought to their steps." And Proverbs 18:17 adds, "In a lawsuit, the first to speak seems right, until someone comes forward and cross-examines." This lesson carries particular urgency in an information environment where the speed of sharing has far outpaced the speed of verification. The first version of a story that reaches you sounds compelling because it was crafted, however deliberately or not, to make a particular impression. It represents one perspective, one selection of the available facts, one interpretive frame applied to events that could be framed several other ways. It has the emotional force of the first account, which is always disproportionate to how the story looks once other perspectives are available. And in that unexamined state, acted upon or repeated, it can do damage that the full picture would not have justified. Proverbs calls the person who believes everything they hear simple. And it is important to understand that this is not primarily a comment about intelligence. It is a comment about the absence of the discipline of critical thought. Very intelligent people can be profoundly simple in this sense, can hear a compelling account and accept it wholesale without asking what else might explain the same facts. Who else might have a different perspective on the same events? What the source of the account stands to gain from the version they are presenting? What details seem conspicuously absent from the story being told? Before you accept something as sufficiently true to act on or repeat, before you share it with others, build judgments on it, or allow it to shape your fundamental assessment of a person or situation, seek the other side. Ask what else might explain what you have been told. Look for the testimony of people who do not share the agenda of your primary source. Give the accused or the absent party the presumption of possible accuracy that you would want if your own account were being evaluated. And do this not only for dramatic claims, but for ordinary ones. The habit of honest inquiry, practiced consistently in small things, is what prepares you to apply it accurately in large ones. Lesson 26. The company you keep is quietly shaping who you are becoming. Proverbs 13:20 states, "Walk with the wise and become wise, for a companion of fools suffers harm." And Proverbs 22:24-25 warns, "Do not make friends with a hot-tempered person. Do not associate with one easily angered, or you may learn their ways and get yourself ensnared." We live in a cultural moment that prizes individual agency and celebrates the self-determined person who transcended their environment. The idea that the people around you are exerting a continuous shaping influence on your character, your values, your perception of what is normal and what is acceptable, can feel like a threat to the sense of autonomy that most of us hold dear. And yet Proverbs is consistently, firmly, and without apology realistic about this dimension of human nature. You are being shaped by the people you spend time with. Not in a deterministic way that removes your agency. You still make choices, and those choices matter. But the environment your relationships create sets the context in which your choices are made. And context has more influence on behavior than we typically like to admit. The person who spends most of their time around people for whom dishonesty is a normal tool of daily life begins, over time, to normalize what they normalize. The excuses that justify deception become familiar. The specific compromises that seemed unthinkable at first become reasonable exceptions to principles that are still, in theory, held. This principle applies to deception in a particularly direct way. Surrounding yourself with people of genuine integrity, people who are honest not only in the easy moments but in the difficult ones, who tell the truth at a cost, who hold the line on their values when holding it is inconvenient, creates an environment in which that standard feels normal and achievable. Surrounding yourself with people for whom the truth is negotiable creates an environment in which negotiating with the truth begins to feel normal, inevitable, even sophisticated. Choose your companions with the full awareness that they are participating in the formation of your character. Not because the influence is irresistible, but because it is real. Seek out people of genuine wisdom, genuine faith, and genuine integrity, not just in their stated values, but in the pattern of how they actually live. Invest in those relationships with the serious attention they deserve. Lesson 27. Diligent observation sees what lazy thinking always misses. Proverbs 10:4 says, "Lazy hands make for poverty, but diligent hands bring wealth." And Proverbs 12:24 adds, "Diligent hands will rule, but laziness ends in forced labor." Vedu. And Proverbs 24:30-34 describes the field of the sluggard, overgrown, crumbling, its wall broken down, and then says, "I applied my heart to what I observed and learned a lesson from what I saw." There is a dimension of discernment that requires genuine, sustained effort, and this is the dimension that intellectual laziness most consistently undermines. Detecting deception, understanding situations with real accuracy, making genuinely wise decisions in complex environments. None of these happen automatically or without work. They require the diligent application of attention, the willingness to dig into what is being observed rather than accepting the surface impression, the discipline to follow a line of inquiry even when it is uncomfortable, to examine evidence even when the examination threatens a conclusion we would prefer to maintain. Lazy thinking is not just inefficient, it is actively dangerous in a world of lies. The person who accepts the first answer because going deeper is effortful, who does not verify what they have been told because verification takes time, who trusts the pleasant surface because examining what lies beneath it is uncomfortable, who processes only the headlines because reading the substance would require genuine concentration. That person is offering an open, standing invitation to anyone who is willing to invest in a more sophisticated presentation than the lazy thinker is equipped to examine. Diligence in discernment means being willing to do the work that accuracy requires. It means not stopping at the version of events that is easiest to accept, but pressing on until you actually understand what you are looking at. It means making the research calls and asking the uncomfortable questions and sitting with ambiguity long enough to actually resolve it rather than collapsing it prematurely into a comfortable certainty. Invest this kind of effort consistently, especially in the situations that carry significant stakes, and you will see things that the people around you who have not made this investment will consistently miss. Lesson 28. Do not gloat over the fall of those who have wronged you. Proverbs 24:17-18 says, "Do not gloat when your enemy falls. When they stumble, do not let your heart rejoice, or the Lord will see and disapprove and turn his wrath away from them." And Proverbs 25:21-22 adds, "If your enemy is hungry, give him food to eat. If he is thirsty, give him water to drink. In doing this, you will heap burning coals on his head, and the Lord will reward you." This lesson belongs in a reflection on navigating deception because it speaks to something that happens in the heart of the person who has been deceived and who then witnesses, at last, the consequences catching up with the one who wronged them. In a genuinely unjust world, where deceptive people frequently appear to prosper and honest people frequently appear to struggle, there is a powerful temptation to find deep satisfaction when the account is finally settled, when the person who lied about you, manipulated you, betrayed your trust, or worked against your interests finally faces what seems like justice. Proverbs does not endorse this satisfaction, and it provides a striking reason for the warning. When you gloat over your enemy's fall, something changes in the dynamic between God's justice and the situation at hand. The warning is not incidental. The gloating reveals something about the condition of your heart, specifically that it has been more invested in this person's suffering than a heart fully at rest in God's justice would be. It suggests that the wound was never fully healed, that the bitterness was kept carefully preserved, that the enemy's downfall was being anticipated with a quality of relish that has more to do with your pain than with a genuine concern for justice. True wisdom processes the wound. It seeks justice through legitimate means. It releases the bitterness that, unchecked, becomes another form of captivity. the captivity of a person whose emotional life remains organized around someone who hurt them, even years after the direct relationship has ended. The person who can genuinely pray for the enemy who wronged them, who can extend basic human care even in the aftermath of harm, is not being weak or naive. They are walking in a freedom that the person who needs to see their enemy suffer never fully possesses. Lesson 29. Discretion protects you in ways that openness cannot always do. Proverbs 11:22 says, "Like a gold ring in a pig's snout is a beautiful woman who shows no discretion." And Proverbs 2:11-12 adds, "Discretion will protect you, and understanding will guard you. Wisdom will save you from the ways of wicked men, from men whose words are perverse." Discretion is not silence for its own sake, and it is not secretiveness motivated by shame or deception. It is the wisdom to know what to share, when to share it, with whom, to what degree, and in what form. It is the capacity to navigate complex social and relational environments without exposing yourself unnecessarily. Not because you have something to hide, but because not every audience has the character or the relationship with you to handle information responsibly. In a world where information is currency, where what is known about you, your vulnerabilities, your fears, your ambitions, your private struggles, can be used in the hands of the wrong person to manipulate, damage, or simply take advantage of you, discretion is a genuinely important protective tool. The person who shares everything, who is chronically and indiscriminately transparent, who treats every audience as though they were a trusted intimate, that person is regularly giving adversaries and opportunists information they should never have had access to. This is not a call to live behind walls or to deny others genuine access to who you are. Human relationship requires vulnerability, and authentic connection cannot be formed without real disclosure. But that disclosure should be calibrated, extended more deeply to those who have demonstrated over time that they can be trusted, and more cautiously to those who have not yet earned that trust or whose character has given reason for reservation. Discretion also applies to what you say about others. The ability to keep appropriate confidences, to refrain from sharing things that were not yours to share, to resist the social temptation of being interesting at someone else's expense. This is a dimension of discretion that is both ethically important and practically significant. The person known for this quality attracts genuine trust. The person known for the absence of it does not, regardless of what other qualities they possess. Lesson 30. Wealth gained through deception cannot be enjoyed. It can only be defended. Proverbs 21:6 says, "A fortune made by a lying tongue is a fleeting vapor and a deadly snare." And Proverbs 10:2 adds, "Ill-gotten treasures have no lasting value, but righteousness delivers from death." And Proverbs 13:11 says, "Dishonest money dwindles away, but whoever gathers money little by little makes it grow." There is a mathematics of dishonesty that eventually works against anyone who employs it, regardless of how favorable the initial calculation appeared. The fortune made by a lying tongue presents itself as a shortcut, a way of arriving at the destination faster, with less of the slow and unglamorous work that honest accumulation requires. And in the short term, the appearance can be convincing. The numbers look right, the position looks secure, the advantage appears real. But the structure beneath it is fundamentally unstable in ways that compound over time. Wealth gained dishonestly requires the perpetuation of the dishonesty that created it, the relationships in which the truth cannot be fully disclosed, the documentation that cannot withstand scrutiny, the conversations that have to be carefully managed, the people who know enough to be dangerous and must therefore be managed as well. The maintenance burden grows. The circle of knowledge expands because lies require coordination, and coordination means more people know. And the more people who know, the less control can be maintained over when and how the truth emerges. And beneath all of the external instability is the internal reality. The person who has prospered through deception knows what they know about how the prosperity was obtained. They cannot fully rest in what they have built, cannot fully celebrate it, cannot point to it with the uncomplicated pride of the person who built honestly and slowly. The prosperity is real in one dimension and entirely hollow in another, and the hollow dimension is the one that matters most to the experience of actually living with what you have accumulated. Build what you build honestly. It will take longer. There will be seasons when the dishonest path appears to be producing better results, and the temptation to cut corners will feel more reasonable than it is. But what is built on truth has a foundation that what is built on lies never will, and when the storms come, the foundation is what determines what survives. Lesson 31. Anchor yourself to God's wisdom, not the world's shifting consensus. Proverbs 3:5-7 instructs, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your paths straight. Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and shun evil." This lesson functions as the great stabilizer of every other lesson in Proverbs. In the world of competing voices, competing claims, competing versions of reality, competing moral frameworks, and competing authorities who all argue that their account is the most accurate, the decision to anchor your understanding and your life to God's wisdom, rather than to the shifting consensus of cultural opinion, is not just spiritually important. It is practically powerful in ways that become increasingly visible over time. The world's approval is an inherently unstable foundation. What is celebrated by one cultural moment may be condemned by the next. What is considered wisdom in one decade may be recognized as profound foolishness in the decade that follows. The moral consensus that feels settled and permanent has a history of transforming in ways that people living inside it did not anticipate. The person who has organized their life and their identity around maintaining the approval of the prevailing culture will find themselves in a state of permanent anxiety and reactivity, perpetually adjusting to a standard that never stops moving, never reaches a final resting point at which the pursuit of its approval can be declared complete. But the person who genuinely trusts in the Lord, who leans not on their own understanding, but submits their thinking and their ways to God's wisdom, is operating from a fixed point. And from a fixed point, you can see what is moving and what is not. You can maintain clarity when the world around you is spinning. You can hold on to what is true when everything around you is trying to convince you that truth is relative, provisional, and ultimately a matter of perspective. This is not intellectual rigidity or the refusal to think carefully. It is the recognition that your thinking needs a foundation and that the foundation offered by God's word is more reliable than any alternative available to you. Submit to it. Trust it. Let it be the reference point from which everything else is evaluated. This is the place from which genuine discernment grows. Lesson 32. Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves. Wisdom carries obligation. Proverbs 31:8-9 commands, "Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, for the rights of all who are destitute. Speak up and judge fairly. Defend the rights of the poor and needy." And Proverbs 24:11-12 adds, "Rescue those being led away to death. Hold back those staggering toward slaughter." If you say, "But we knew nothing about this," does not he who weighs the heart perceive it? Does not he who guards your life know it? Will he not repay everyone according to what they have done? Wisdom is not only a personal possession, and discernment is not only a private benefit. Everything that has been gathered in these 33 lessons, the clarity, the capacity to read situations accurately, the ability to detect deception, the understanding of how manipulation works and how to resist it, all of it carries an obligation that extends beyond your own protection and flourishing. Wisdom that serves only the person who holds it has not yet reached its full expression. In a world of lies, the people who are most consistently and most severely harmed by deception are not the powerful and well-resourced, who have access to lawyers and advisors and the ability to pursue recourse when they are wronged. They are the vulnerable, the people who lack the social standing to make their account of events credible, the financial resources to pursue justice, the connections that would bring their situation to the attention of people who could help, the platform from which to tell their own story. They are the ones most easily deceived, most easily exploited, most easily left without remedy when wrong is done to them. Proverbs places the responsibility for their advocacy on those who have the wisdom and the standing to speak, and it does so in language that does not allow for comfortable indifference. If you see what is being done and claim not to have known, God who weighs hearts is not deceived by this claim. The willingness to see injustice clearly when you have the capacity to see it and then to speak honestly about what you see when you have the standing to speak is not optional for the person who genuinely fears God. It is the logical expression of wisdom that has been genuinely internalized. Look around you. In the places where you have standing, where you have influence, where your voice carries weight, where is truth being suppressed against those who cannot fight for it themselves? What does wisdom require you to say there? Lesson 33. The one who truly fears. God has nothing else left to fear. Proverbs 19:23 says, "The fear of the Lord leads to life. Then one rests content, untouched by trouble." And Proverbs 14:26 adds, "Whoever fears the Lord has a secure fortress, and for their children it will be a refuge." And the magnificent closing portrait of Proverbs 31, in describing the woman of noble character who is the human embodiment of the wisdom Proverbs has described, ends with this: "She can laugh at the days to come." She can laugh at the days to come, not because the future holds no uncertainty, not because the world has become honest or the people in it have stopped their deceiving, not because the challenges ahead are small or the stakes are low, but because her life is built on wisdom, on integrity, on the fear of God, on foundations that do not shift when the world does. And from that place, the future does not need to be feared. It can be faced with the settled confidence of a person who knows who holds it. We began this journey with the fear of the Lord as the foundation of wisdom, and we return to it here as its crown. Because all 33 lessons, the listening and the boldness, the patience and the discernment, the honest rebuke and the generous spirit, the guarded heart and the courageous voice, all of them are facets of a single way of being. A way of living rooted in genuine reverence for God, committed to truth as a non-negotiable standard, oriented toward integrity as the primary measure of success, and therefore genuinely, structurally free from the fears that make human beings most susceptible to deception. The person who lives in the fear of God does not need the approval of the people around them. They do not need to win every argument or be seen as the most impressive person in every room. They do not need the flattery of those who want something from them, or the false comfort of a pleasant lie, or the anxiety management of a situation that is actually as complicated as it appears. They are rooted in something deeper than circumstances, something stronger than opinion, something more durable than any reputation that can be managed or any position that can be revoked. In a world where everyone seems to be lying, the most radical thing available to you is not a more sophisticated counter-strategy or a cleverer approach to detecting manipulation. It is simply this: To live persistently and without apology in the truth. To fear God more than you fear people. To value your integrity more than your convenience, more than your comfort, more than the approval of the people in the room. To build the whole architecture of your life on foundations that no deception can undermine, because they are not made of the material that deception can reach. This is the wisdom of Proverbs. It was ancient when it was written, and it has not aged a day. The book of Proverbs has been called the most practical book in the Bible, and after 33 lessons drawn from its pages, it is not difficult to understand the designation. Its words do not float above the ordinary life. They meet it in the workplace and the home, in the marketplace and the community, in the intimate relationship and the public square. They address the specific pressures that specific human beings face in navigating a world that is not always honest, not always fair, not always what it presents itself as being. What is remarkable about these lessons taken together is the consistency of their vision. Every lesson connects to every other. The fear of God produces the humility that enables learning. The humility that enables learning produces the patience to listen carefully. The patience to listen produces the discernment to read situations accurately. The discernment to read situations accurately enables the boldness to speak truthfully. The boldness to speak truthfully builds the reputation, the good name, that cannot be manufactured or purchased, only lived. And all of it returns again and again to the same foundation. The person who fears God more than they fear anything else is free from the dependencies that deception exploits. This is not a way of life that produces invulnerability to being hurt, being deceived, or being wronged. It does not promise a world that is fair or a community that is uniformly honest. What it promises is something more valuable than either of those things: clarity. The ability to see what is actually happening, to recognize the patterns that matter, to hear what is actually being communicated beneath what is being said, to make decisions based on reality rather than on the management of your perception by people who have their own agenda. In a world that increasingly rewards performance over substance, flattery over honesty, the compelling lie over the complicated truth, this kind of clarity is countercultural. It costs something. There are environments in which it will make you the strange one, the difficult one, the person who refuses to play the games that everyone else has accepted as the inevitable rules. Proverbs does not pretend otherwise. It has never promised that the righteous path was easy. It has consistently maintained that it was worth it, and that the person who walks it long enough, faithfully enough, will find that the brightness of that path increases with every step they take. May the 33 lessons gathered here not remain as knowledge in your mind, information acquired and then filed away while life continues in its familiar patterns. May they become conviction in your heart and direction in your steps. May they shape the way you listen in the next difficult conversation, the way you evaluate the next surprising opportunity, the way you choose the people you trust, the way you handle the next provocation to anger, the way you speak about those who are not in the room. May they keep you sharp in exactly the places where the world is working hardest to dull your perception. And may you walk, as Proverbs describes, in a path that keeps getting brighter, all the way to the full light of day. As Proverbs 3:13 declares, "Blessed are those who find wisdom, those who gain understanding." Before this video ends, I want to ask you for a few things that genuinely matter to us. First, if this content spoke to you today, please subscribe to this channel if you have not already, and please share this video with someone who needs it. Think right now of the person in your life who is navigating a situation where this wisdom would be exactly what they need. Send it to them, share it on your social media. Let someone else be strengthened by what strengthened you. because wisdom multiplies when it is shared, and the community we are building here grows stronger every time a new person finds their way into it. Like this video, because that simple action helps the algorithm carry this content to people who are searching for exactly this kind of biblical teaching. Turn on your notifications so that when our next video is released, you are among the first to receive it. We have more to come. More of the deep living wisdom of Scripture brought into direct contact with the real pressures of modern life. You genuinely do not want to miss it. And if this community has added something real and lasting to your life, if these studies have given you clarity, encouragement, or the language for something you already sensed but had not fully articulated, I warmly and sincerely invite you to become a channel member. Membership means early access to videos before they go public, a closer relationship with this community, and the tangible support that makes this ongoing work possible. You'll find that option just below this video. Finally, a blessing for you, wherever in the world you are watching from, in whatever season of life this video has found you. May God guard your heart with the wisdom that only He can give. May He sharpen your discernment in exactly the places where you need it most. May He surround you with people of genuine integrity and give you the courage to be that kind of person for others. May He protect you from every deception that has been designed to harm you and bring to light every hidden thing that you need to see. May your name be built on the substance of genuine character, and may your path grow brighter with every step you take in faithfulness to Him. Until next time, stay grounded, stay wise, stay rooted in the Word. God bless you.